Good evening. Not sure why I'm up here. I don't have anything good to say anyhow. But yeah. Okay. And guess what we're going to talk about tonight? That would work too. Self-esteem. What is self-esteem? What you think of yourself? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Is there different kinds of self-esteem?
You could call healthy self-esteem. I think that would be a right kind.
We don't often hear about healthy self-esteem. Most times we hear about low self-esteem. That's most times what you would hear referred to as self-esteem. So I don't think I did a very good acting job there, but did that make you just feel like all in, what's he got to say? You're like, oh no, we don't have to sit through this, do we, right? So the person with low self-esteem is hindering themselves, but not only themselves, they're hindering God's message, because it's not, like I said, I don't have anything good to say, but God has lots of good things to say. And if we have ourselves that much in the focus, then we are hindering God's message from being spoken also. Genesis 1:26 through 27. Then God said, "Let us make men in our image, according to our likeness." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. God saw that all he had made, and it was good. He didn't leave that part out. It was good. He was pleased with what he made. So who are we to say that we're not good? Just as a little bit of examples here, this one I guess has Dad's name, but it's not you, I guess. I don't know. When 14-year-old Harold was being talked about his conduct problem in school, he replied, "I guess you could just say I'm a born loser." George was asked to deliver a brief lesson, short talk to a group of men in the congregation, and in rejecting the invitation, he said, "I can't talk before the group because I don't have anything worth listening to." That's where I got my idea for that. Another one, this is actually a fairly common problem that I've observed and probably maybe even done myself, I don't know. Little Timmy was asked by his father to join a group of children in a game of baseball. Timmy struck out his first time at bat and refused to play anymore. In spite of his dad's encouragement, he refused to play. In an upset tone, he shouted to his father, "There is no use for me to try. I can't hit the ball. I know I'll just strike out again." That sounds pretty common, doesn't it? So why don't we hear more about this whole self-esteem thing? Are we too proud to talk about it? In some research that Dr. Maxwell Maltz did, I've never heard of the name before, but in some research that he did, he found that 95% of all people in society deal with this problem, low self-esteem. So why do you think there's such an issue with that?
Isn't it because there's so awful? Are you talking about a low self-esteem?
Low self-esteem, yes.
I would say probably one of the factors is some of the experiences they may have experienced in their life. Childhood experiences that were not good. Maybe they were bullied by their peers and it left a scar.
I would agree with Brad that people have been basically told you're not good for anything. And that hurts. A child's gonna take that throughout life. I understand that there can be victory, can be won, but it's still gonna hurt.
Right. Victory can be won, but the negative voices always are a lot louder than the positive voices, or it tends to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
What happens when that happens, we develop an image of ourselves that's not accurate. And we need to develop an image of ourselves in light of God and what we can be in Christ. And that there's a battle between those two forces.
Along with that, I think we need to be careful on the other side of, we're not the individuals making fun of those individuals that are having issues in their life.
But now, you said about 90%, 95% of people struggle with it. Surely not 95% of us have been abused. I know the term bully is used, but it's kind of a whatever. Surely not that high a percentage have had those experiences. So is it just something we all have to come to grips with? That God didn't make any junk? And who we are in Christ.
I actually came across that saying somewhere here. I wrote it down. I'm not even sure where I have it now. But yeah, when you feel inferior, just remember God didn't create no junk.
I think sometimes it has to do with how I perceive what is being said as an individual, whether it has the effect of making me feel like I don't have any self-worth. It may not be intended to, what is said may not be intended to discredit, but it may be my perception of what was said and how it was said. There's a lot of factors in there.
That's a very big part of it. I'm not saying there's no one out there that's just trying to hurt you, but so many times it's people saying stuff they don't realize how you're going to interpret it, and that's how you get hurt. There's 3 questions that we can ask ourselves. Who am I? What am I? And why am I? And if you start really thinking about that, who am I? That can be just your name. That's who you are. What am I? I'm a Christian. I'm God's child. Why am I? That could be many things. It could be just the simple practical things. I'm here to provide for my family. I'm here to serve others. I'm here to, most of all, to serve God. But those questions can give us purpose. That helps us to go back to square one and say, this is who I am. What these people are saying, that's not lining up with who I am. That's not me. And then that comes into your self-image also. I think someone already said something about that a little bit too. It's how you see yourself, and obviously sometimes that can your self-esteem can help or hinder that, whether it's good or bad self-esteem. But a lot of people with low self-esteem don't view themselves as beautiful. They don't view themselves as good looking. They always view themselves as ugly. And I think that's the message that we're sending ourselves because of how we think of ourselves. Is self-confidence the same thing as self-esteem? Not a trick question. I know it takes a little bit to think it through because it took me a while to think that one through, but
it directly affects, self-esteem will directly affect your confidence. It's exactly the same thing, but they're really close together.
Can you have one or the other? I think you can, to a certain extent, and sometimes it's not in a good way, sometimes it is in a good way. You can have self-esteem, and some of the difference, I failed to say that too, some of the difference between self-esteem and self-confidence. Self-esteem is your value. Self-confidence is your belief in your ability to do something. So just because don't say that I don't have confidence enough to go fly an airplane doesn't mean that I don't have good self-esteem. That just means I'm not confident in my ability because I don't know how. But then you can also come across as overconfident in an area because you're trying to cover up for yourself, lack of self-esteem. So I think that's the biggest thing that we need to remember. Self-esteem is our value, and how valuable are we? How do we know our value?
Oh, one of the ways is look in the Bible. God
Right.
cares for the sparrows. I don't think any of us tonight, that's the bird lovers, that we really appreciate sparrows. And we might try and get rid of them. But yet God still meets their needs, cares for their needs. So how do we get over this? Maybe you're gonna get into it. How are you gonna get over this thing of self-esteem, to have a good self-esteem?
I'm getting there too quick.
Well, I'm just asking. I think sometimes in life, I almost said, look, I'm not trying to put my wife down, but sometimes people will say you can do anything. And I disagree with that. However, do we put ourselves down so low that we don't hardly get anything accomplished? Are we willing to get out of our comfort zone and do something we've never done before? There was a point in time we put the wall. But as we continued on throughout the days, there was progress there. I got the idea now, I'm too old to learn computer stuff. People today ought to, if they're younger people, they better get onto that because, and people might disagree, but really, if you want a good paying job, you better get into it. But there's other places too, you can haul Amish too, if you have patience. I understand that, but our makeup is different. So we need to get out of our comfort zone sometimes. Yeah, you're gonna make mistakes. If you never made a mistake, then you made a mistake by not making a mistake.
Well, for starters, I have a bunch of other stuff to go over with that too, of how to get over that. But for starters, one thing I have written down is let God be the mirror that you see yourself in, not what other people are saying about you. That's the biggest thing to get over that lack of confidence or lack of esteem for yourself. And also, see, I had some verses here, Bible examples. Can you give me some examples of people in the Bible that maybe didn't have the most confidence or made lame excuses of how they weren't good enough for God's calling?
Isaiah, Gideon.
Moses.
Yeah, Gideon tried to just get out of his responsibility there by saying they came from a poor family. That's pretty lame. What does that have to do with anything? Jeremiah was another one. He said, Lord, behold, I cannot speak, for I'm a child. I'd like to have someone look up John 3:16 and 17. I think we all know that pretty much by heart, but I'd still like for someone to read it. Someone volunteer to do that, or say it by heart if you got it.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but the world through him might be saved.
And then Romans 5:6 through 10. Trent. And while he's finding that, someone want to look up 1 Peter 1:18 and 19? Keith.
For when we were yet without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man one will die, yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God commended his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, being now justified by his blood, we should be saved from wrath through him. When we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Much more, being reconciled, we shall be saved by his life.
And then 1 Peter 18. 1 Peter 1:18.
You know that ye were not redeemed with corruptible things as silver and gold from your vain conversation received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as a lamb without blemish and without spot.
Those verses right there explain it all. What's our worth? Our worth could not be bought by gold or silver. It was only by the blood of Jesus. We're not worthless. We're worth a lot. There's lots of things that can be bought with gold and silver, and many things that almost can't be bought with gold and silver. It takes so much of it, but yet we ourselves, in God's sight, are worth so much that we could not be bought with money. And that, I think, we can cling to and realize our worth and realize we're not worthless, no matter if someone told us that or not. It doesn't matter what you heard in the past. God says something different. There's that saying that I was talking about either. I am somebody, because God don't make no junk. Another thing that I thought about too, probably is the biggest thing of why we deal with this, is we don't want to come across as arrogant and prideful or think too highly of ourselves. In Matthew, I think it's Matthew 22, that it talks about not thinking more highly than you ought to think. I think I'm thinking of the right reference. I think we run with that verse and think that we're thinking too highly of ourselves too quickly. The Bible doesn't really talk a whole lot about our love for ourselves. I didn't spend just a lot of time looking for it, but for the most part, it talks about loving others. But then there's the verse about loving your neighbor as yourself. Well, let's just say in my life, and probably in the life of others, I would pity my neighbor some days. If you really think about it, the way that you treat yourself and the words that you say to yourself, whether verbally or just you think them, would you actually say those same things to your neighbor? I hope not. I hope you're not tearing other people down, but somehow we think it's okay to tear ourselves down. And that's something I definitely deal with. If I mess something up or just don't do something quite right, it goes directly to me. I'm the dumb one that can't do it. Not willing to just accept it, that everyone makes mistakes. So I would like to get to the positive of this eventually here, but I would like to look a little bit at the consequences. What are the consequences of having this low self-esteem? Number one, just what I talked about, a negative vocabulary. I can't do anything right. I'm a dummy, etc. Whatever your self-talk is, it tends to be negative when you don't have the right perspective of yourself. Lack of inner peace. Collecting stuff just to make yourself feel better, to change your worth, supposedly. It doesn't, but that's the idea. Constant criticism, constantly trying to impress everyone, always giving a negative reaction to compliments. I'm definitely guilty of that. You think you sound humble by saying, oh, it wasn't nothing I did. I mean, it was, yeah, no big deal. But that's one of those things that can definitely be an issue. But another thing is bragging and self-conceit. I know that's kind of the opposite, but both of those things can be consequences. And a bragging person is never a pleasant person to be around. Always trying to outdo the other person, constantly talking about something he has done, self-indulgence, food or overeating, and too much emphasis on being confident. I don't know if you've ever met someone that you thought was just a little bit overconfident, and I don't know if they just loud, boisterous, whatever the case is. Most times they're covering up for something. There's people that are just loud, and that's just their natural self. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. So those are a few of those things that could be issues that you will face if you don't deal with that. And none of those things are a pleasant thing. And a few more things. Afraid of anyone seeing who you really are. It's another one. Building defenses around weakness, that kind of goes right along with that. A drive for power or control over others. Placing impossible demands upon yourself. That's a big one. When you feel like a failure and you say, well, I'm never going to do that again, and you do it the next day, you feel like a failure. Sometimes those goals that we place are not really, we're not able to reach those goals necessarily. Even if they're good goals, sometimes we place them too far out ahead. We need to focus on the small goals. And just a lot of the small, obvious signs also, anger, guilt, resentment, just all that stuff goes kind of hand in hand with that. When you judge yourself, you tend to judge others also. So we're kind of hurting each other in our goal to get out of this if we are not careful. Another quote that I found, a person who has lost his dignity is like a ship without a compass. He goes through life going one direction and then the other, trying to reach the shores of happiness. So when we have too low of self-esteem, we lose our dignity. And when you lose your dignity, you have nothing. I think we kind of covered some of the causes of self-esteem. Childhood was one of the big ones that I came across when I was looking at this. I think sometimes too much emphasis is placed on that. The parents are all at fault. I know that definitely is an issue, and it probably is an issue more in some homes than others. But I really think the biggest thing with this self-esteem thing is ourself. I think we're putting too much focus on those around us. If we're so focused on those around us, we're looking, like I said earlier, we're looking for the hurtful words, not looking for the positive words. Even though maybe one hurtful comment was made in the day, the rest were all positive, we're still thinking about that hurtful one. And so I'm not saying that we don't need to go back and revisit that and just say, hey, you know what, back then that hurt. But if we dwell on that and say, that's why I am who I am today, that's why I'm a loser, that's why I don't have any confidence, I think it's okay to label that as what it is, but I think we need to move on from that and realize, like those verses that we read, how valuable we really are. It starts young, like we said, when you're a child. There's a lot of peer pressure that can cause confidence issues, whether it's playing games, getting picked last, whether it's whatever the case is. And it goes the whole way on up into adulthood. And I'm guessing even once you're 70, 80 years old, you probably still deal with it somewhat. I don't think that the peer pressure's there quite as much. But pretty soon, yeah, as you grow up, you get status labels, maybe nicknames that could be hurtful. There's all kinds of different things. So another thing that I think is a false high self-esteem or feeling good about yourself is accomplishments. We feel like I started this business, it grew, it was prosperous, or I did this and I bought a brand new car when I was 20 years old and paid cash for it. I'm a good person. Well, the other side of it is true too. When a business fails, when you go bankrupt, that's a fairly big one, but even just the small failures, we take that as a direct hit against ourselves. That's not ourselves necessarily. We need to realize that our accomplishments do not determine our value or our worth. I guess, is there any other thoughts as we were going on there? I was just kind of rambling there. Does anybody have any thoughts as we were
What I
talking?
thought of is comparing myself with somebody else is probably has some direction of low self-esteem, because I'm comparing myself with somebody else or a group of people, and I have not arrived and I have not achieved. When we talk about achievements, but comparing ourselves with others, and the Bible says that's not wise. And I just think maybe that's just me, but comparing myself with others.
No, that's definitely right.
May I suggest that the problem with having a low opinion of yourself and also with having a high opinion of yourself seems to be where your focus is on yourself. When you asked for examples, almost immediately my mind went to Jacob. When he thought Joseph was dead and Simeon was a prisoner in Egypt, and he was being pressured to send Benjamin along as well. He said, all these things are against me. Maybe that's what it looked like, but in reality, God was working all those things for him. When he stood before Pharaoh, even after the amazement of finding that Joseph was still alive, he said, the days of my life have been few and evil. But when he went to bless Ephraim and Manasseh, somehow his perspective and his attitude had changed during those 17 years in Egypt. He referred to God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long and to this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil. That's from Genesis 48. It reminded me also of how it says in Proverbs that the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be safe. And it would be interesting, lastly, to study the life of the Apostle Paul with respect to this question. He announced a high opinion of himself, finding all the supposed advantages as rubbish. At first glance, he might have seemed to have a low opinion of himself, saying he wasn't worthy to be called an apostle, and he was less than the least of all the saints and the chief of sinners. But that was in the context of being amazed at God's grace in his life and what God had done for him. And he said in 1 Corinthians 4, "But with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. For I know nothing against myself, yet am I not hereby justified. But he that judgeth me is the Lord."
And Paul also talked to the Corinthian church about every member being valuable, every member having a different place in the church maybe, but every member having value. So, yeah, that was definitely something he talked about.
One of the fellows at work on the back of his pickup was tailgating. I think something to the effect, my rights come from God, not the government. And we can make application as well, as far as the things that really matter is really what God thinks of us, not people around us.
Let's move on a little bit here. Does anybody have any ideas or pointers of how, if you're stuck in this low self-esteem, how do you get out of it? And there's already been some stuff said. It's fine. If you want to repeat, I don't care.
There's many variables. But if you are in a situation where you are just daily or weekly bombarded with negativity, you might have to be removed from that circumstance before you can actually start changing. That, I would say that's extreme, but I know that's valid.
Wound can't heal when it keeps getting opened back up again all the time.
I immediately started thinking of Philippians 2, 3 and 4 say, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but lowliness of mind. Let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others." Sometimes if we don't have a high view of ourselves, it's because we're looking at ourselves too much. And so maybe part of the solution would be start focusing on others,
Right.
and your esteem will go up.
That was actually my last thing I had on my list there, was to do things for others. One thing I would like y'all to do, not right now necessarily, you can start on it now or think about it now, but in this next week or maybe even tomorrow before you forget about it, write down all of your positive qualities that you have in your life. I know it's hard to do. Might feel prideful, but look at the positive qualities in your life and look at the ways that God has blessed you and the talents that He's given you. And if you doubt having them, they're there. Just you aren't looking deep enough for them, and you got blinders on your eyes because you're trying to be humble, and that's not humbleness. And one last question I have for y'all too, and it was referred to earlier, but are you the one contributing to someone else's low self-esteem? And think about that very deeply. Whether it's a supposed joke, whatever it is, be careful that you're not always just busting them apart. there's nothing wrong with having fun, but I think for every bit of fun, there needs to be just as much positivity and even more positivity. And never go so deep as to take a jab at their actual person. You might be able to laugh with them at something that they did or something they messed up on or whatever the case is, but never make fun of who they are or anything like that. I guess I'll share a little bit why this came on. So this past week, one of our trucking friends, I don't know him real well, I only talked to him a couple times, but committed suicide. And that's where this came from. Because suicide those thoughts don't start until your self-esteem is so low that you think you're worthless. And so that's my challenge to us, to just remember you're worthy, you're special, you're loved, you matter, and God has a purpose and a plan for you. And so that's my challenge that I'm going to leave with you. Let's just make sure that we're not the cause of someone else's downfall and that we can be an encouragement to others. Thank you. I'll turn the time back to Richard.